Hello, I'm Mathieu from Tutovox.fr. My colleague Fanny, whose hands you'll see, and I are going to teach you everything you need to know to play your first Solomon Kane game. In Solomon Kane, you help the famous Puritan hero by Robert E. Howard to fend off darkness. You each play as a cardinal virtue. Together you must repel evil and light a path for Solomon Kane. Solomon Kane is a narrative-driven game, with different game modes and difficulty modes to tailor and renew your game experience. When you play an adventure, you alternate between story and scenes. Both types have widely different objectives. Let's move on to setup. For this video, I'm playing Rattle of Bones, which is a recommended story for a first game. As presented in this video, setup and rules represent 4 players with the base rule set and a low level of difficulty. Start with the adventure rulebook and go to page 4. Retrieve all necessary miniatures, tiles and tokens. Choose the virtue you wish to play as. Take its miniature, dashboard and action cards. Place the miniature on the aura space on the top left of the dashboard. Shuffle your action cards and split them into 2 4-cards piles. Look at each of these piles and choose one to start the game with. From those 4 cards, choose 2. Place one on each side of your dashboard in the right-hand slot and left-hand slot. The remaining 2 cards are your starting hand. Shuffle a pile you haven't chosen and place it near your dashboard. This is your personal draw pile. Next to the play area, place tiles, miniatures, and your adventurous discovery cards. Do not shuffle those, along with all common components you need for every game. This comprises fight cards, do not shuffle them, A side up, fight effect cards, do not shuffle them, face down. Event cards, shuffled, sin cards, shuffled, the omen card, and darkness cards, shuffled. For your first game, I recommend not shuffling nightmare cards into the darkness deck. Keep the nightmare cards at hand, as some effects might require them. Then retrieve dice, tokens, luck and mercy cubes, the cloud, and stat track. Setup is now finished. Let's move on to the rules. A Solomon Kane adventure has one or several acts. Each of those acts is divided into chapters, either story or scene chapters. As a virtue, during those chapters, you will be able to perform a number of actions, each depending on your current goals and on dice rolls. After each virtue turn, enemies, called darkness, will take a turn. When you reach the end of a chapter, your story will take a different path depending on the results. The game ends either when story text tells you so, or when some stat values are reached. To get started, read the text from chapter 1a. Take stock of all special rules, of the meaning of each keyword used in this chapter, and the goal of the chapter. Make a draw pile with as many darkness cards as shown. Shuffle these cards and place them face up so that they are within reach of all players. Take the discovery card or cards as shown. Flip them and read them from left to right. There are 3 types of discovery cards. Cards with an instant effect trigger once when revealed. Cards with ongoing effects applied for as long as the card is in play. Cards with opportunities, which bring new game possibilities. Except if mentioned otherwise, these are usable when needed and by any virtue. Then, place stat trackers on the appropriate space of the gauge, as shown on the chapter page. The chapters play in a series of rounds with the same structure. First, you allocate turn order tokens. You collectively decide on a strategy and on who takes which token. Then each player takes their turn in the order you just decided upon. After each virtue turn, darkness plays as well. When your turn is up, you must perform these 9 steps in sequence. Start resolving start of turn effects, if any. Those may be provided by discovery cards or the current chapter rules. Then roll 3 dice taken from the common pool. The symbols you obtain are resources that allow triggering actions from your cards or dashboard. To buy an action, you must spend as many resources as printed on it. After the dice roll, you may either re-roll one of your 3 dice, or flip a die to its opposite side. It is the only way to change your roll result. Dice have the same symbol spread. 2 faith on opposite sides, 1 bravery and 1 fear on opposite sides, and 1 pain and 1 determination on the 2 last opposite sides. If any dice have been donated to you by other players, add them to your 3 rolled dice. These dice are your pool for this turn. Depending on what you want to achieve, allocate dice from your pool to the following spots. A space of one of your dashboard actions. A space of one of your active cards. A space of a discovery card. A space from the dashboard of a virtue not played by any player. A space of the center action of any virtue dashboard. To do that, you must also spend another die of your pool. Put that die back into the common pool. One of the donated spaces of another virtue's dashboard as long as this virtue has not played their turn this round. A virtue may only offer 1 die to each virtue each round. However, multiple virtues may gift a die to the same virtue. No virtue must have more than 2 donated dice. If you should receive a 3rd die, you must choose and discard one of the dice. You may also store a die on your dashboard. This allows you to keep dice for the next round. At the end of your turn, all of the dice will be put back into the general supply. Note that the faith symbol is wild and can replace any symbol. You may only use 1 wild per action. An action bearing the faith symbol does not mean you can use any symbol. The question mark indicates that. In the same fashion, you can use mercy cubes taken from the cloud. You may help yourself from the cloud whenever it feels necessary. Any action symbol may be filled by a mercy cube. You may use any number of them per action. You may also combine mercy cubes and a wild die for the same action. Some action spaces require no dice. Instead, they change stats. In no case you can use a mercy or wild to replace stat changes. Once you are happy with your dice allocation, you may trigger your actions. You may trigger all actions from which cost has been paid in full thanks to dice and stat expenditure, if applicable. Whenever you take an action on one of your active cards, discard this card once the action is resolved. Now, let's see what effects you can trigger. Story chapter actions. Story chapters allow the story to progress and do not imply map tiles or any miniatures, be it virtues or enemies. These chapters will either give you choices or you will have to light Solomon's Kane path. In those chapters, you will make ample use of discovery card actions, especially opportunities. These actions allow you to prepare fighting against enemies. You'll put chances on your side by collecting luck and mercy cubes, or will gain blessing tokens. Luck can be used when resolving tests. This will be covered later. Blessings are very powerful one-use abilities that can be used anytime and by any player, even outside of their turn. All those elements, when collected, are placed onto the cloud. During story chapters, you will play actions, allowing you to put light on slots. Intuition from Justice's dashboard is one such action, or Prudence's cards such as Radiance or Gratitude. Whenever you trigger an action placing 1 or more light tokens, except if instructed otherwise, you may allocate which slot to fill. This may be on the storybook on Solomon Kane's path to have the objective move forward, or on top of the center action of any virtue, or on a card. A space can contain only one light token. Light tokens remain in place as long as an effect doesn't tell you to remove light. Whenever that happens, you may remove any light token. Scene chapter actions. Scene chapters focus on a key moment of the adventure. You play those moments to determine how the rest of the story unfolds. In those chapters, you will have to act onto the game board. You will have access to deployment action, move actions, or actions that need a test to be carried out. When you start a scene chapter, if your virtue's miniature is not on the game board, you will have to place it through an action to interact with different elements. When you deploy your miniature on the board, you may place it wherever you feel it is best. However, each area may contain only one immortal miniature. Immortals are virtues and shadows. Both influence Kane. Note that two virtues can never be in the same area, even following movement. Areas are shown on the board by white lines, simple or doubled, and red lines. If two map tiles joined together make a lineless area, an area can be on two tiles. Once on the board, virtues can benefit Solomon Kane, contrary to the shadows. First, they have an aura. Your miniature is not on your dashboard anymore. Its aura applies to Solomon Kane if it is adjacent to the virtue or in the same area. Note that all aura abilities can be applied altogether if applicable to Kane. The virtues protect Solomon Kane from shadows by repelling them or destroying them. I'll go back to that aspect when I tackle darkness turns. You may already have noticed there are actions labeled with a specific term and a number. This is the case for move, talk, explore, and fight. All these actions are meant for Solomon Kane only. Kane takes actions. Your virtues or the other miniatures in the scene do not. For the move action, it shows the max number of areas you can move. You may decide moving only one area with move to, for example. You may move to areas marked with a single white line with no restriction. Red lines cannot be crossed, you must take another path. Double white lines show special areas. Discovery cards or the scenario will give you more detail in this. If no additional precision is made, consider them to be simple white lines. Talk, explore, and fight need a test, and can be taken only if the chapter tells you they are available in the keywords and stats section. An ongoing effect from a discovery card can make them available as well. When you take such an action, you must start determining the base value of the test. This value matches the number after the action name. For example, the base value of this talk test is 5. The center action on the dashboard has X instead of a number. X is equal to the number of light tokens on top of the action. If Justice did not have the arbitration card, it could use the reason action with a base value of 2. After finding this value, you may add the number on top of the stat matching the test. Clarity is applied for an explore test, compassion is applied for a talk test, and strength is applied for a fight test. In our case, we should add 2 as our compassion level is 9. Add modifiers from auras that influence Kane if applicable. If the virtue whose aura matches the test being taken and is adjacent to Kane or in his area, add its aura value. Subtract 1 per shadow adjacent to Solomon Kane. In our example, because Justice is 3 spaces away from Kane, he is not influenced by her. It's a pity since her aura adds 2 to talk tests. However, this shadow removes 1 to the test. Our test result is 6 now. To obtain the final result, you must add a random number. To do so, draw the first event card and only refer to the numbers at the bottom of the card. Add the value matching the miniature type to the test. The left number is for a crowd ally or rabble enemy. The center value is for champions, of villains. The rightmost value is to be added if the ally is a hero, or if the enemy is a nemesis. The type of enemy is listed in the Keywords and Stats section of the chapter. Except if shown otherwise, Solomon Kane takes the tests as a hero, the rightmost value. Note that if you don't like the number, you may discard a 1 luck cube from the cloud to draw a new card. You may repeat this as long as you have luck cubes on the cloud. You have to keep the last drawn card's number. The total result is 10. Refer to the Keywords and Attributes section to see what card you'll draw. Beware, you must look at the line of the character against whom the test is taken. In this case, Solomon Kane talks with Gaston. You need to retrieve card D212. Note that if you retrieve the same discovery card twice in the same chapter, if it is still in play and has an instant effect, the card ability does not trigger. It only does when it is drawn for the first time. Nothing happens on other occasions. Fights are a bit different. In Keywords and Stats, there is no precision regarding the result of that type of test. You must use the fight cards shown at the bottom of the chapter page when taking that type of test. When you have multiple fight cards at the bottom of the page, check what character matches which. When Solomon Kane fights during this chapter, you must use card F015. The effects you should trigger are in a section that matches the result. Contrary to other tests, instead of taking a discovery card, take the fight effect card or cards shown and resolve them in sequence. If the fight card has this symbol and the remains in play text, flip the card after use and play with the other side. The card is discarded once the chapter ends. Once all actions are taken, you may renew your cards on your left and right hand slots. If you wish so, discard 1 or 2 active cards and replace them with cards from your hand. Refill your hand to hand size. You should have 2 cards. If your deck is empty, shuffle your discard pile into a new deck. After that, discard all dice still in play except those reserved on your dashboard. Apply end of turn abilities if applicable. To tell your turn has ended, flip your turn order token on its blank side. This allows other players to see that you have played during this round and shows if they may give you dice this round. Before moving on to the next virtue turn in the order you chose, Darkness is going to play. To take her turn, draw the first Darkness card and resolve its abilities. These may vary depending on the type of chapter you are playing. For story chapters, apply the first section of the card, then discard it. For scene chapters, apply only sections 2, 3, and 4. Section 2 is about activating miniatures near Solomon Kane, in his area or adjacent to him. Section 3 is about activating miniatures far from Kane. This depicts all miniatures that are not nearby. The last section spawns new shadows. Apply effects in sequence, from top to bottom if possible. If an activation is impossible, move on to the next line. A line may activate multiple miniatures. In this case, if miniatures with the same keyword are from a different level, activate them in descending order of importance. Nemesis, then villains, then rabble. However, each miniature may only be activated once per Darkness card, whatever the number of lines that apply to it. Modifiers from miniatures apply as long as applicable. When not mentioned and when multiple miniatures are activated, choose the order in which to activate. After you activated all miniatures from sections 2 and 3, you must have a shadow spawn in the area shown by the card if needed. Note that you may only spawn shadows within the limit set by the danger stat level. If the number of shadows is equal or higher than the danger threshold, ignore this step. Shadows are very powerful immortals that only want to thwart the Virtue's plans. They negatively influence Kane and only care about him. Shadows never fight. They exert influence over Solomon Kane during tests, when they are near him and that they threaten him. We've seen them reducing the value of all tests Solomon Kane takes by 1. Moreover, they increase the enemy's tests against Kane by 1 if these tests target Solomon Kane. Whenever a shadow moves on or through an area with a mortal miniature other than Solomon Kane, nothing happens. However, as soon as a shadow enters Solomon Kane's area, remove the shadow and draw the top card of the event deck. Apply its effects. The same goes if Solomon Kane enters an area containing a shadow. The shadow is removed and you must resolve the top event card. If Solomon Kane had more movement, he could carry on after the card's resolution. Like with darkness cards, apply all lines from the event cards as much as possible and in sequence. Ignore any numbers at the bottom. If you remember, those are used to randomize tests. Then, if a shadow wants to enter an area where a virtue is, the player controlling it has a choice. It can hold ground. The shadow remains in its area, its move ends, and danger level increases by 1. If the player chooses that option when generating a shadow, it is placed on an adjacent area to the virtue. The player chooses where to place the shadow. The player can let the shadow move in. It triggers a shockwave. The virtue and all shadows within its aura are removed from the board. The virtue is replaced onto its dashboard. Do not draw any event cards. Rounds go on like this until the end of the chapter. The end of a chapter triggers in 2 cases. Either an icon says so, or you run out of time. The darkness deck made at the start of the chapter is empty. Move on to chapter resolution. This depends on how well you met the goals of the chapter. For scenes, the criteria are shown in the outcome section. Follow the directions to move on to the next chapter. In some cases, a discovery card tells you where to go to continue your adventure. For story chapters, Solomon Kane's path is said to be dark if there is 0 to 2 light tokens on the path, and bright if there are 3 to 5 light tokens. Before moving on to the next chapter, you may use those light tokens to change stats. For each change, you may lower danger by 1 or increase any other stat by 1. 3 light allow you to make 1 change, 4 light impart 2 changes, and 5 light 3 changes. Discard light tokens afterwards. At the end of a chapter, you keep all donated and reserved dice, as well as everything on the cloud except for purity points. Discard all discovery cards, fight effect cards in play. For scene chapters, remove all miniatures from the map and place all virtues on the aura spaces of their respective dashboards. Setting up a new chapter is quite the same as game setup. Read the narrative text. Take stock of special rules and goals. Make the darkness deck, retrieve and apply all discovery cards in the prompted order. If it is a scene chapter, place tiles, miniatures and tokens as necessary and as shown. Take the fight cards listed if that option is available during this chapter. You start the chapter with your current stats. Move from one chapter to another until the end of an act. An act ends when the storybook tells you about a victory or defeat, be it major or minor. It can also end because of stat values. This happens if strength, clarity or compassion must go below 1, or that danger should exceed 10. Go to the last page of the storybook. Note that the degree of victory or defeat has no bearing over the game. Here are some important points we saw during this video. This will avoid gameplay errors. Now you know the base rules of Solomon Kane. May your games be fun, and see you on Tutovox.fr.